Melinda, thank you for participating in one of our conversations on this website. I've known you for a long time. You were a senior advisor in the Senate when I was Deputy Prime Minister. You pulled together a book called Defiant Birth, and my wife wrote a chapter for that. I know you as somebody who is a very clear and objective thinker, which makes it even more challenging that you have things to say to people like me that are pretty confronting, frankly. But I think they're important, and even if people like me want to say, no, that can't be right, or no, that's not me, I think they need to be heard. So given that those days are now a while ago, back in Canberra, tell me what you've been doing since.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you, John, and to your audience today. So yes, since I saw you last, I've written a few more books. I've got 6 books now. My new one just came out a couple of weeks ago. I've been writing, I've been speaking. I'm a commentator, social commentator, and I formed a movement called Collective Shout for a World Free of Sexploitation, grassroots campaigning movement that calls out corporations and marketers who objectify women and sexualise girls to sell stuff. So that's really become my main focus over the last decade since we formed.
One of the things that disturbs me, if I can jump in at a random point, is that in modern, sophisticated, urbane Australia, violence in domestic settings is not only a problem, it appears to be a very serious problem, and there's now been an enormous effort by governments to do something about it, which always strikes me as a bit counterintuitive. I mean, people should not be living that way in the first place. We shouldn't need to spend taxpayers' dollars on it, but it's evidently a really major problem.
Yes, violence against women and girls is a scourge on this country and globally. You know, I believe there is a war against women. If you look at the rates of violence, trafficking, dowry deaths, child brides, if you look at female genital mutilation, if you look at the fact that there are 50 million girls missing in the world because they were either victims of sex selection abortion or female feticide. When you look at all of those things, and on top of that, the violence in our own supposed enlightened Western liberal democracy, we have to acknowledge that something is going badly wrong when women can be treated this way. And, you know, every day there's a new assault, there's multiple reports of another death, another murder, another, you know, domestic violence episode. And you think, when is this going to stop? And I commend governments for putting resources, money into this, but I do agree with you. Why has it come to this? That governments need to intervene to try to turn this around before we have even more murdered women and sexually assaulted women.
As I said, this is in many ways a pretty confronting sort of area to go into. There's a part of me that wants to say, hey, I don't mistreat women. I can't understand the idea of domestic violence. It's beyond me. And I keep hearing that that men are terrible, and I hear about Me Too, and I think, you know, most men don't deserve that. How have we ended up here?
Many men are not like you, tragically. And how have we arrived at this? What is it that we're doing to shape men in this way? How are we growing our boys to think that violence is acceptable? Why do 1 in 4 Australian boys think it's okay to pressure a girl into sex, to pin her down? That no means yes. You know, rape myths are very much alive. She wanted it, she was asking for it, she deserved it. I'm in schools every day and I hear these things still said. So unfortunately, we can't extrapolate from decent, nice, good John Anderson to so many other men, because the reality is that we are driving the empathy out of boys from the moment they're born, and we're teaching them that to be male is to be brutal and to be cruel and to be callous and to not be emotionally literate and express yourself and be empathetic. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for girls. It's a tragedy for boys as well, the way that we are allowing that cultural deformation of boys essentially from the moment they're born. And unless we address the cultural formation of attitudes which contribute to violence, we are not going to get anywhere. And that's what Collective Shout does. We join the dots. We say, well, you're not going to have good, considerate, emotionally literate boys when you present them with an idea that girls exist for their gratification and pleasure, that girls are there purely for them. And pornography has made this so much worse now because that's what we're teaching boys. You know, the most violent sites are the sites that are the most popular. And so boys are being trained in domination and girls are being trained in submission. And until we address that, we are not going to make a dent in the stats around violence against women.
Well, there's a heap of issues to unpack there, and let's try and work through them. But to go back for a moment, I'm probably one of those the people who worries about fragmentation, and tribalisation, atomisation in Australia, about the breakdown of stable political leadership, about what I see as poor economic management. I could go on and on and on. But one area where I've genuinely thought we were making some progress is that I've been one of those people, I suppose, who's thought, well, it's good that men are opening up more, that dads are relating more to their boys, that we've moved through a lot of what was very necessary, I think, from the feminist movement. But you're really confronting me, and you've got the statistics to back it up, to say that the way we pat ourselves on the back about the progress we've made is hiding some very different truths.
Yes, that's exactly right, John. I think we'd like to think that some things have improved, and probably some things have improved, but the stories that I'm hearing at the coalface are getting worse, and they're getting worse younger. So one of the most common questions I'm now getting from Year 7 girls is, how do I say no without hurting his feelings? I have girls telling me stories that they experience wolf whistling, catcalling every day from the age of 8 or 9. I have girls telling me about being hassled every day at school to send naked images. I have girls telling me that they are groped on the school bus every day on the way home. I have girls reporting incidents to me that are happening at school, which then I have to make mandatory reports about. What our girls are having to endure every day shows that actually we really haven't made enough progress, and that boys think they can do this stuff and get away with it. It's a tragedy, and I'm now speaking on these issues in primary school. I had a teacher say to me the other day that she was talking to a group of Year 7 girls, and she was curious as to what the boys talked to them about at school. And the girls said, porn. They talked to us about the porn they watched the night before. And the teacher said, surely you are exaggerating. Surely they want to interact with you on other things. And they said, no, that's all they want to talk to us about. So she then went to check with the Year 7 boys and said, boys, is this really what you talk to the girls about? And the boys said, yes, that's what we talk about. The girls are being asked, show us your tits at school. The demands for naked selfies. Most girls I know have experienced a demand for a sexual picture. They say to me, we don't know how to stand up for ourselves. We don't know how to say no. And they want the harassment to stop. But again, the boys are getting these cultural messages that this is acceptable from video games, from porn, from rap artists with extremely degrading, misogynist lyrics. So our message is, it's hard to get our message through when that's what we're up against.
While I'm sure there was a fair bit of inappropriate talk and what have you in the playground when we were younger, my impression is that it's now not just talk, it's acting out, it's vastly different. So instead of becoming, if you like, more civilised, we become less civilised. And you're identifying what's driving that.
Yes.
The early sexualisation of children.
Yes, sexualisation of children and what we call porn culture, pornified culture. Our children are growing up in a shadow cast by pornography, pornographic imagery, pornographic themes. They are imbibing from very early ages. We know the average age of first exposure is 11. That's the average, not even the first age. I'm being told stories of 7, 8-year-old boys being exposed to rape porn, torture porn, sadism porn, incest porn. And they think this is normal. They think this is what sexuality is and should look like, and this is how they should behave. We are carrying out an unprecedented assault on the healthy sexual development of our children. I don't know how our young people will be able to form healthy, intimate relationships when pornography is their formative sexual environment, how will they understand about what true intimacy and human connection and even sensuality look like when they're learning from porn? Just recently, a young woman told me that when she's on dating sites, she lists as a fetish wanting to stare into someone's eyes and make love slowly, because she said if she doesn't list that as a fetish, it'll just get dismissed. So it has to be seen as this kind of weird...
That's a fetish?
That's a weird, crazy fetish she has, wanting to look longingly into someone's eyes and make love slowly, because that's really weird, right? That's so weird that you would want to do that. We're seeing a rise of physical injuries in girls based on porn-inspired sexual acts. Again, I don't know how much of this you want to go to edge on, but we're seeing a rise of choking and strangulation in girls, even high school girls, again from porn-inspired acts that boys want to carry out. A young woman told me recently that her last 4 Tinder hookups, she said the men went for my throat without even asking. So you can see this barbaric sexual practices that are inspired by a global porn industry worth $150 billion US a year. Is
more than the GDP of many of the countries on Earth.
Well, correct. That's right. We are inscribing new codes of conduct and sexual conduct specifically in our boys and young men. And what does this mean for relationships, for long-term partnering? Boys are finding real girls actually kind of boring because they get so much novelty from porn. I just read a research paper before coming to see you about how boys are queuing to computers. So they see a computer screen and they're being aroused, but they're not being aroused by real girls or even by skin-to-skin contact. They say we're not, that does nothing for us. It's the novelty of what they're going to see online. We're seeing rising rates of erectile dysfunction now in young men at rates never before seen. This used to be an older man's disease. And now young men are experiencing that because, again, of the deluge of pornography. Some of the boys in this study that I just read this week started consuming porn or being exposed to porn at 7, 8, 9 years of age. And some ended up watching 6, 7, 8 hours a day.
I find that almost impossible to believe.
Well, they're either studying or working from home, and they just have it on constantly.
So that raises itself a whole number of issues. Are there any particular, if you like, cohorts that are at risk?
And any person, any boy with an internet-enabled device.
Regardless of family background,
correct.
where they
the stories
live,
are the
culture?
same. The stories are the same everywhere I go. The stories are the same. Private schools, public schools, low socioeconomic, high socioeconomic, regardless, the stories are the same. You'd like to think that they might be different, that there might be some more protective factors. But again, it's very hard even for, good families, parents who are doing everything right, to compete with this global industry which is preying on our boys. We talk about accidental exposure. It's actually very deliberate exposure to build new markets. In Cambodia, for example, the cost of the internet is $1 a month. It's the cheapest form of entertainment for boys. So they're watching it all the time. They're just watching it all the time because it's the cheapest thing for them to do. That's just using Cambodia as an example. And this is global colonization of the world with the messages of the porn industry. So everyone is at risk, really.
So,
particularly women and girls.
There'll be many parents listening to this who'll be thinking...
who are harmed by the behaviours.
So there'll be many parents, I would think, typically listening to a conversation like this or reading the statistics.
Yes.
Deeply troubled.
Yes.
They'd be thinking, surely that's not happening under my roof. And they'll be asking themselves, how do we guard against this?
Well, it may not be happening under
both
their
very
roof.
difficult.
It may not be happening under their roof. It may be, but it may not be. But that doesn't mean it's not happening on the school bus on the way home. It doesn't mean it's not happening in the schoolyard. That's where a lot of kids are being exposed. On the school camp, where they're showing each other porn and acting out what they're seeing. So families might have every internet filter known to mankind on the home computer. They might have every rule, but even then, the child isn't safe. I've had parents tell me, my son was watching skateboarding videos at the kitchen table and porn came up. My child wanted to look up a recipe and porn came up.
Without them doing something to trigger that?
Correct. The child wasn't looking for porn, but porn is looking for the child. Porn will find your child. And we have to wake up and smell the manure. That's the reality. And if we're not equipped to deal with it, our kids are going to suffer even more than they already are. And they already are. Rising rates of depression, anxiety, low self-esteem. Girls are killing themselves now at rates equal to boys for the first time in history. You know, girls are exhausted curating this life on Instagram, which isn't a real life, but they have to keep up the sort of the myth of appearance and this happy life when really they're struggling and they're suffering. It's very hard to be a teenage girl in this culture. There's huge pressures to conform, to be thin, hot and sexy, to put yourself out there sexually. You know, they're being sold a false message about what empowerment and true freedom and liberation looks like. It's really a sex industry inspired message that doesn't value their true dignity and value and worth. And that's with the work we do in schools. We try to help our young people see that they're worth so much more than their limited, stereotyped, normative ideas proclaimed by the global sex industry. I don't even know what your original question was, but it was very good.
Melinda, so it knows no sort of socioeconomic bounds.
No.
That leaves another question: how widespread? I mean, what sorts of percentages, if you like, of our young people are now finding themselves caught in this mess?
Oh, it's very high, compulsive use. I mean, it's hard to get exact figures because we do need more research, but the sort of the preliminary research we have shows that close to 100% of young people have seen porn by the age of 15. Again, even if they weren't deliberately seeking it out.
So parents concerned then, confronted with the reality that you're hopeful thinking that you've protected your children is probably unrealistic. What advice can be offered?
So we urge parents to act personally and act politically. How can they act personally? Know what your kids are doing online. Have the computer in a public space in the family. Value young people for more than their looks. How often do we praise girls for how they look? What about praising them for how well they did in their maths test, their science test, that they did an act of charity, that they got involved in causes that they cared about and wanted to change the world and make a mark and make a difference in the world? What do we tolerate in the home? Do we tolerate the violent music, the misogynist rap artists? Do we tolerate poor behaviour from boys towards girls or towards their mothers? Do we tolerate body judgment? Mums have to take some responsibility here. The research says girls take their cues from their mothers in terms of how they feel about their bodies. Women are products of the culture as well. We all need to own this. I know we're talking a lot about young people, but we've all imbibed these messages from the culture. So when mum, for example, punishes herself for having dessert or compulsively works out or continues to complain about her appearance, girls will realise, oh, that's really important, as well. So what kind of talk do we allow? How about throwing the scales away? The weight tells you nothing really about your health. You may not weigh much, but you may not be eating very well and looking after yourself either. And so we have to challenge those normative ideas we get as well.
That's a very challenging idea in our modern culture.
Yes, indeed. And fathers modelling healthy, respectful behaviours. How do they treat the mother,
Important.
Absolutely. How do they treat her? It's not always what parents say, is it? It's what they do and how they act. Do boys get pulled up for bad behaviour? If they do something wrong, are there real consequences for that? How do we model empathy and emotional literacy in the home? So there's some of the personal things, encouraging rites of passage, encouraging a lot of outdoor play, encouraging sleep, for heaven's sake. Our girls and our boys are not getting enough sleep. I'm going into primary schools now where kids are falling asleep in my class. So I stop speaking. I say, why are you so tired? Then I ask them, how long were you up last night online? And I start with 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours. Some of these kids are up till 4 in the morning playing games, watching YouTube clips, primary school kids. And sleep is contributing to the cycle of depression and anxiety. They can't learn properly, they can't focus. And then so much screen time as well, which is rewiring their brains. They can't concentrate. So all these things feed and fuel, each other. But then we have to act politically. The problem is, John, we've all been too polite. Now, politeness isn't something I particularly suffer from, but there's a lot of polite people out there, and we've put up with
over the years,
we've put up with too much.
You've always said it.
Well, we've put up with too much, haven't we? We have to live here too. We have to breathe the air. We have to walk through the shopping centres and see the pornified portrayals of women, floor to ceiling, in so-called male champions of change shopping centres, such as Westfield Centre Group, AMP. Such as Lend-Lease and vicinity centres, which claim to care about sexism. They pledge to addressing sexism in their workplaces and yet allow floor-to-ceiling pornographic portrayals, porn-inspired portrayals of women, including at Easter, as we've just seen, and at Christmas. The wicked camper vans with their misogynist slogans all over them, mobile misogyny, driving around, promoting the abuse of women and girls. That's just 2 current examples. There are so many more. So it takes a village to raise a child. The village has to rise up and say, enough is enough. We need to change this. We need to act for cultural transformation and social change. And we want better. Our politicians have failed us. They've failed to protect our children. They've allowed our kids to be fodder in a global experiment which is harming them. Our regulatory bodies have been an abject failure, particularly the self-regulated Advertising Standards Board, which has no powers to enforce any ruling it makes. There are no fines for non-compliance. So we need a new regulatory system. And we need protection from porn for our kids, proof of age requirements as are being rolled out in the UK. So we're not going to change anything unless citizens rise up and decide they've had enough. You've heard the saying, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And if we don't fight this, we're saying this standard is okay, that we are happy with that. Well, actually, we're not, and it's time to act and to change it and to call out, we elect our politicians to do something particularly for the most vulnerable, but they're not doing it. The vested interests of corporations, of profit-driven companies are being put before the well-being of children and the well-being of women and the well-being of the community as a whole. Why should it be like that? Well, I can tell you why it is like that, because they've got money, and money buys power, as we know. So where's corporate social responsibility here? And what are our governments doing? Nothing.
Come back to that in a moment.
Call me
Again, just to backtrack
disillusioned.
for a moment to the personal.
Yes.
I remember when my wife and I got married, a very wise man said to us, when it comes to raising children, the most important thing you can do is to love one another and be consistent, and to remember that an awful lot of cues will be taken by any sons you have and any daughters you have.
Correct.
In relation to their sexuality from the way
Yes.
you treat their mother.
For sure.
I was told.
Yes, good
I
advice.
take it that still stands?
I think that is good advice. Obviously, not every child is being raised in a 2-parent family, but I certainly think that modelling the behaviour is, of course, it's a very good thing to do, but it's a great thing to do. I'm not taking from that, but again, we're up against this global industry that is teaching our children something very contrary to that. That's why we need the personal and the political to work together. And that's why we need more politicians to step up to the plate and act to address these genuine and well-founded community concerns.
So then to go to the political, you've mentioned some of the things that might hold men back or from politicians back. But I do look at some who have attempted to take this on and they have paid an incredible price. They've been trashed. Correct. And very, very few people have come to stand by them.
Correct.
In an age of social media keyboard warriors who seem to be able to just about destroy anybody or attack anybody or find terrible points of leverage that would require great courage, I suspect.
It is very difficult in this current age to have a civilised discussion, to even pose a question, to engage in a thoughtful and respectful way. And we've seen that the hate mongering, the level of trolling online, it's very hard to express a different view or a different opinion without getting completely destroyed. That concerns me. You know, I'm a journalist by training and you know, an author and writer, and I want to feel free to be able to explore difficult things. I want to have my thinking challenged as well. I don't want to just live in an echo chamber and just read things I agree with. I try to read widely and consider other views, but it's becoming harder to express them, and there is a price to pay. There's no doubt about it. And you know, I weigh up every day. Am I going to go out on this today or not? Am I up for this? Am I up to what's going to happen if I say this? And I fear that the current environment, and particularly on social media, it makes you actually less brave, and that's a real trap. Because I'm not just bagging social media, I use it a lot. Like most of our campaigns are won on social media. Most of the wins that we have happen that way. 95% of them happen through social media. So, you know, I'm not here bagging the internet. However, there is that very vicious, nasty element where there's this huge pile on, and it doesn't even matter what the facts are. And when you say, actually, no, that's not what I meant or what I said, or here's the facts, that's irrelevant. One of the responses that I'm hearing more even in schools is, well, that's her truth, or that's his truth, or that's my truth.
Moral relativism.
Yeah, and you say, well, actually, here's some facts. Let's engage with those facts. Irrelevant, doesn't matter. There's a lot more tribalism, there's a lot more popularism, there's a lot more spouting of slogans I'm noticing in schools, rather than actually, let's just unpack that for a minute. Let's consider this view and this view and this view. Any discussion gets shut down with a slogan. And I fear we're losing the ability to think and to frame an argument, to reason, and to have a civilised discussion. And it's really unfortunate.
There's a great call for more women in our parliaments. I would imagine much of what we've talked about would be seen as of great importance by feminists. Are perhaps they going to be better placed to confront some of this on behalf of our girls?
Well, that's already happening. And the feminists that I work with globally have led the charge against these issues: objectification, sexualisation, porn culture, harms of pornography. Leading feminist writers were speaking out on this before pretty much anyone else. You know, if you go back to the 60s and 70s, it's women like that who continue to pay a price for their position against these global industries which use the bodies of women and girls as fodder for profit, these global sexually exploitative industries. Yes, I am agreeing with you. We do need more women saying these things, but we need more of everyone saying these things, because we need to agree. We need to see the harms that are being done and work together to change it. Whether you identify as a feminist or you don't use that language, I'm more concerned with, what are you doing? Let's see the action, regardless of what you want to call yourself. I don't even care. But what are we going to do to address the harms of a pornified world to all of us, but particularly to our young people?
You've talked about how girls are coming to you explaining how difficult this is, and presumably, overwhelmingly saying, we want to be free of this. Yeah. They don't want to be caught up in anxiety and in the almost epidemic problem we have of suicide and those sorts of things. And we don't want them caught up in it. Yes. They're begging for change and for something different. What do you say to them?
Well, I love engaging with girls. It's probably my favourite thing to do. And I have the great privilege of addressing thousands of young people a year and increasingly more boys. So what I do with the girls is I take them on a tour of media, popular culture. We unpack messages from ads, from marketing, from toys, games, from fashion, from social media. And we explore what girls learn about themselves, about their bodies, about relationships, and about sexuality. We look at the impacts on their physical and mental health. And then we look at what can we do about it as women? How can we act personally? How can we act politically to change it? And it's just such a joy and such a pleasure when you see the lights going on. When they realize there's not something wrong with us, we thought that there was something wrong with us, there's actually something wrong with the culture that makes us hate ourselves, that makes us feel we're not good enough, we're not thin enough, we're not hot enough, we're not sexy enough, we can't compete, we don't get enough likes on Instagram. We can't compete with the cult of the Kardashians. And they realize that, one, not only have they been lied to, but two, they can do something about it. And that's where we get into how they can be involved in campaigning, how they can call out this toxic culture, how they can demand something better from the world they live in. They are not just passive victims of these toxic cultural messages, they can be agents of change. And that's where you see them changing before you. And they will often write to me and say, after hearing that message, we've decided to do something about it. We've run a campaign through our school, or we decided to support a cause, or we decided to fundraise for Collective Shout, or we decided to support our local women's refuge, or to go overseas and work with vulnerable young women in another country. They start to see that they can become global players to change these things. And that's really inspiring. Or they might decide to go into politics. So that's what I do with the girls. And then I have girls saying to me that after hearing you speak, I was asked to send a naked selfie, and I said, how dare you talk to me like that? I'm more than just my body. You shouldn't treat me like a piece of meat, as one 15-year-old girl said. And they get some power back. They realise that they don't have to endure a daily sexual harassment, that they can say something about it. They don't have to endure the behaviour of porn-conditioned boys. They can stand up and say something, do something about it. And they start to get their self-value and their self-worth from something other than the attention of boys who aren't treating them well anyway. They start to realise that they can deserve more. And then with the boys, I do the same. I take them on a tour of media and popular culture and help them.
Because just to interrupt you for a moment.
Yes, stick with the girls.
It distresses me. I'm not rejecting what you're saying, but it distresses me that it should ever become an issue of power. That they have to have power. They find power again. They should never have had to have gone looking for it in the first place. In one sense, they should have been respected.
Correct.
And most of them presumably want to be respected, which leads to the next point. Presumably, the great majority of them would like nothing more than to be able to enjoy loving, respectful, committed, intimate relationships with someone of the opposite sex. Not all, but most would prefer that. So that raises the question.
A lot of them don't even think that's possible, John. A lot of them just want to be left alone.
All the tough things you've said, I think that's about the toughest thing of all.
Well, here's the thing.
We all want to be loved. We're all hot-wired to be in intimate relationship.
Yes, but a lot of the girls, because of what they experience, day after day after day, from badly conditioned boys, that doesn't appeal to them. They don't want that. They'd rather be on their own. They just want to be left alone.
I find that truly awful.
Well, what's on offer isn't attractive to them.
I'm not rejecting what you're saying. No. I'm just saying
this is not in every case. But what is on offer, it doesn't appeal because it's none of those things. It's not intimate. It's not respectful. It's not loving. It's demanding. It's you exist to please me, And the boys are learning to behave towards girls because, again, of a porn culture. which eroticizes cruelty and brutality and
that-
being callous.
A question asked in good faith. That can be more powerful in the boy's life than the influences at home and in the classroom from responsible parents
I do believe
and
so.
responsible teachers.
Tragically, I think that is the case.
That's another shocking thing to have to contemplate.
I think that's the case.
All right, well, let's turn it around. There must be, I want to say something in defence of the decent young blokes that I do meet.
Yes.
If they're caught in this, many of them must themselves come to a point where they want to escape it
Yes.
and find a better way.
Correct.
I met a young man the other day,
Yeah.
and he would have ticked all of the boxes for the sort of the ideal young Australian man in many ways. But in conversation, he became highly emotional. He said, I just don't know what it means now to be a man.
Yes, correct. They're very confused. So I'm doing more work with boys now, and thankfully I'm meeting more boys who want to break free from the mask of masculinity, to break free from a stereotyped, harmful norm about what it is to be a male. And it's those boys that keep me doing this work. And it's not easy. I don't wake up and think, yay, I get to talk to boys about porn and sex today. How did I get so lucky? It's difficult, and there is, obviously there is some pushback. However, I'm now encountering more young men who say what you're saying is true. We can see how this culture has harmed us. We don't want to be like that. We want to be emotionally literate. We want to be empathetic. We want to be whole, well-rounded citizens. We want to be decent men. How can we do it? And, I'm just so grateful. For example, I had one boy stand up in the classroom and confront boys who were laughing at the images I was showing that included pro-rape T-shirts. It's not rape if you yell surprise. It's not rape, it's a snuggle with a struggle. Eat, sleep, rape, repeat, fashion for boys. And these boys, a group of boys were laughing, and this boy stood up and said, how dare you? This is serious. This was in a public school in Tasmania. You can't just laugh this off. He had tears in his eyes. I've had other boys stand up and say, sorry to interrupt, but I just want to apologise to every girl in the room who I've ever mistreated. I've had boys coming up to me after the session and confessing things they've done and wanting to change, wanting to atone, wanting to make up for what they've done. I had a 15-year-old lobby to get me into Knox here in Sydney. 15-year-old, that had never happened before. He wrote a submission to the principal, said, we need this message. Our boys have to hear this message. So when I meet boys like that, I think hope is possible, and that we can work together and bring about change. And the girls understand the boys are under pressure too. They do understand that. They do understand that they're under pressure from harmful ideas about masculinity, from poor role modelling, look at the kind of men that still get praise in our culture. The sports stars that behave badly and get away with it. The misogynist, anti-women rap artists who still get to tour, the country and spread their evil philosophies about women and the place of women. So a lot of girls do understand the boys are under pressure too. And when we do this cultural dissection, this cultural unpacking, they get it, they do get it. And they want to, I think our generation screwed this up big time. We owe our young people a massive apology for what we've done to them, this toxic mess we've delivered to them. But I believe it's the younger generation that will rise up and change it. And I'm seeing more signs of that, thankfully.
An awkward one, and perhaps we can't answer it here, but given what we now know, and I'm not a medical sort of person, but about addiction and about how hard it can be to break, and the fact that most addictions, I understand, are similar in terms of the sort of neurological pathways and what have you. A young man who recognises he's trapped in a way.
Yes.
He's ensnared.
Correct, yes.
Wants to break free.
Yep. Where do they go?
Can they?
Well, they're contacting me.
Some will, I suppose.
It's very difficult. It's probably more powerful in a lot of ways than many addictions. It's been compared to the power of crack cocaine in terms of the massive hit that particularly young men get. And, some of the research I'm reading is showing boys viewing porn 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day and ending up in places they never thought they would go. Boys contact me all the time telling me that they're trapped, that they have a compulsive porn use, they don't know how to break free. And it's so difficult because there are so few services for them. And because a lot of people think there's nothing wrong with it as well.
Well, that's absolutely the case.
So they don't get helped.
Yeah, there was an SBS program on recently featuring Europeans, not Australians, where the norm amongst young men was that this was mainstream, there wasn't an issue.
Yes, correct.
At all. But tell me...
there's a couple of online sites I refer boys to for help, but they need more face-to-face. They need transparency and accountability and care and support, checking in on each other, being able to talk about it, because it's contributing to loneliness. So loneliness can contribute to porn use, but porn use actually deepens the level of loneliness and disconnection and emotional fragmentation. It contributes to an inability to them to have healthy relationships. They don't know how to read body language. They cue to computers rather than to real human beings. I had a boy come up to me recently, year 11 in Melbourne, and the first thing he said to me was, "It's been 100 days." I said, "What do you mean 100 days?" He said, "It's been 100 days since I stopped using porn." I was really interested. I really have boys coming up to me and telling me this. I said, "Why did you stop?" And it takes 100 days, they say, to break a habit. So he was well on the way. He said, "I was recognizing that I'd become the kind of man I despised. I was turning into men I didn't like." He said, "I recognized that I'd stopped doing life-giving activities that once brought me joy. I'd stopped doing them because I just wanted to get back to the porn." He said, "I recognized that I stopped spending time with my family." He loved his family. They had a good relationship, but he was lying to them so he could get back to the porn, and he saw them as taking him away from the porn. He said, "I recognized that I started to mentally undress every woman I met in my mind, and I didn't want to relate to women like that." And so he found this support service, this support group online, and he joined it, and he'd stopped using. And, I was really proud of him. I had another young man, 16 years old, come up to me in Melbourne at the Justice Conference, and he said, "I want to tell you a story." He said, "I first heard you speak a year ago, and I'd been consuming porn from the age of 12 to the age of 14. He said, "I heard you speak here a year ago, and from that day I stopped using, and I just thought you'd like to know that." Blithering wreck. And I was just really proud of him as well. He didn't want to be part of consuming images of women, who are often sold into this industry. We talk about trafficking. We need to understand women are trafficked to produce pornography as well. And he didn't want to be part of this global system, which he recognised was degrading to women and degrading to himself. So there are signs of hope. And hopefully that there will be more young people like that breaking out of this, horrible, toxic, controlling scourge that is preying on them.
You've talked about some illustrations of personal success there. You mentioned earlier the need to tackle, if you like, the corporate world.
Yes.
And get them to exercise their responsibility. We see a lot of virtue signalling, some
Yes.
of which just leaves me cold from
Yes.
corporate leaders today.
Well, it's easy to say things, but what are you actually doing?
Yeah. And are they actually stopping and thinking through what
Yes.
really needs addressing?
Correct.
Some of the talk we hear about the need for equality and diversity and recognition of people's rights at the moment leaves me absolutely ill at ease, because the issues they're talking about pale into insignificance besides the sort of, if you like, human needs that we're talking about.
This all relates to those things. This all relates to equality, to just treatment, especially of women. So don't give me your pink washing. Don't say you're going to drive out sexism.
Can I just interrupt there?
Yes.
Isn't it equally true of our boys? Aren't they being ensnared by something that?
Of course,
that's
and I think
beyond their control?
we've already acknowledged that. I think yes.
Yeah.
Of course, they're all being ensnared. But when we see these statements from corporations that they're going to address violence against women, they're going to drive out sexism, they pledge to remove sexism from the workplace. Well, Westfield is a workplace. Centre groups are workplace, vicinity groups, these are workplaces, and they have floor-to-ceiling pornified portrayals of women And so what they're saying there is, well, we're saying these words over here because, they sound good and we want to look like we really care. But at Collective Shout, we're concerned about, well, what does that look like every day? What do your words really mean when here are these images that we've been documenting for years now that you still have out there? So you can't have it both ways, boys. I'm sorry. You can't call yourself a male champion of change and wear that as some great badge of honour when you still depict women in demeaning and limited ways and suggest that they exist primarily for male gratification and pleasure. You just can't have it both ways, and we'll continue to call them out for their hypocrisy. Show us that you actually mean it. Exercise genuine corporate social responsibility that shows you really do care about the status of women, rather than just mouthing all these words and signing these pledges when you're actually not enacting them in your daily life.
So these are enormously sobering issues that you're raising, and deeply disturbing, and frankly pretty heartbreaking.
Yes.
For the loss of our children's
We should be heartbroken.
relationships.
We should all be sobbing wrecks over this, what we've done.
Tell me then, Collective Shout is active. You have people from a wide variety of backgrounds and perspectives helping.
Yes.
But to people listening to this conversation, picking up on this, and they want to help you force multiply, what should they do?
Well, collectiveshout.org is our website.
Because there's a lot of kids out there,
Yes.
and not many of you trying to
Yes.
address this issue.
Correct, yes. We're actually quite a small team doing all the work, really, and we need a lot of support. We are running out of money, and we do have need for financial support. We need more volunteers. We need anyone with any skill, really, that a non-profit needs. We want to multiply the effect, and we do punch above our weight. People, I think we have more resources than we really do. We do punch above our weight. So anyone that wants to help, there's so many ways that they can do that, even if they don't want to be, sort of the loudmouth person, like loudmouth sort of activist type person. There's a lot of ways to support, the frontline activists, and we can help them to do that. Collective Shout makes it easy to complain as well. We help people to navigate the complaints process, the complaint system. So if you join us, your voice will multiply. A lot of women will say that Collective Shout helped them to be brave. Before they thought, were they just being a bit hung up? Was there something wrong with them that they didn't like, all this stuff? But then they realise, well, actually, no, thousands of other people feel the same way. So it emboldens people to take action in the public square, in the public domain, to reclaim public space, to call for something better for themselves, for their kids. So yes, it's about the multiplication of the collective voice.
So that's liberating for women who hear that. Can I say, I do know from the commentary we get back from these conversations, there'll be perhaps not a torrent, but there'll be a significant number of men who will be emboldened and encouraged just to know that the different perspective they're wanting to take is a healthy one.
Absolutely, and we have more men getting involved. We have some fantastic male ambassadors, great supporters like Steve Bidoff and Michael Carr-Gregg, and we've had support from Paul Dillon, who does great work on drug and alcohol with young people. And so we do have more men coming on board and recognising that they have a civic responsibility to step up, stop leaving everything to us. We need the men to step up and get on board as well if we're going to bring about a change.
So Melinda, as we try and make sense of some of this, I think we'd agree that our objective is emotionally well-adjusted girls, emotionally well-adjusted boys who are able to mesh properly with one another, romantically and in every right sense of men and women loving each other and respecting one another. The Me Too movement, as I look at it, I've been one of those who's, I think, reluctantly come to understand that you can blame the bad behaviour of at least some men for it arising. Is there a danger of it overreaching, of it being captivated? My concern being that if we want to see a restoration of healthy relationships between men and women, we need to be careful we don't build enmity where there's no need for enmity or where it's not helpful.
It's a fair question, John. However, my concern is that when we start to engage in whataboutery, and has it gone too far and has it overreached, we miss the cultural moment of reckoning. What happened with Me Too and this global outpouring of women saying, me too, this happened to me, girls saying, this happened to me, is that in this moment in history, women and girls felt at last that they could express what had happened to them and find strength in that expression of common experience. So if we're too hasty to say, oh, it's gone too far, or it's going too far, or this or that, or what about this, or what about that, before we have properly examined what it is like for women and girls, the true, real, lived, actual experience, girls have a list of things they do every day to try to keep safe, and it's no guarantee, of course. There's a list of things women and girls engage in to try to be safe, because they're not actually safe in this world. We're not safe to move about freely, unmolested, without some sexist imposition being put upon us or some threat. And girls and women understand that in a way that men and boys don't. Because if I were to ask you, what steps do you take, John, to stay safe? If I were to ask the young men here what steps they take to stay safe, they look at you blankly. They wouldn't even have to think about it. But women and girls do all the time. And so I think Me Too was the moment that had to happen. It was a moment of cultural reckoning. And if we're too quick to dismiss it and look at the exceptions or the whataboutery, or, well, I know men and they don't do that, that doesn't take from the ones that do, and what needs to change so that women and girls can live and flourish and move about freely in the world and take up their full rights in society without that constant risk and harm and the normalisation of sexual harassment and entitlement that girls know in a way that I think men and boys don't. So let's not move away too quickly from examining that.
I understand your point. I think the only thing I'd say in response then is to say this. Let's try and make sure that the objective is restoration, not permanent alienation.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily the women doing the alienating.
No, I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying that.
The alienation is happening as a byproduct of mistreatment and a denial of our human rights and our full worth and dignity as human beings. So I do agree we do need to work together to fix it. Absolutely, I do, which is why I'm doing more work with boys and why I welcome more men in our movement. I do welcome that. But I think it can be a force for good if we allow it to be. That doesn't mean I don't believe in due process and justice and the rule of law. Those things are still important. Yes, they are. But let's examine the truth that came out of that Me Too movement and learn from it to try and to change things so that it doesn't keep happening.
As I stop and think about that young man's question, what is it to be a real man? I guess the point in many ways has to be made that men do have power. They can use it for good or for ill. Men ought to be encouraged to use it nobly, to protect and to nourish, and if you like, to give of themselves and their strength, rather than to try and exercise it to dominate others.
Yes, I think that's a good way of putting it, John.
A satisfactory masculinity,
yep,
as opposed to a toxic masculinity.
Yes.
And we'll all benefit if we can work towards that objective.
Yes, we can agree on that, John. Yes, for sure.
I'm glad.
Thank you.
Melinda, thank you very much indeed for giving us your time.
It's a pleasure, John. Thanks for the opportunity.
And it's terrific to see you again.
It's lovely to see you again as well. Thank you.